Good afternoon or evening, depending on what side of the pond you're on, and welcome to another Belarus special edition of Across the Pitch. My name is Phil Kennedy, and I have Jonny Hibberd back with me today to talk some Belarus Premier League.
Hi.
Things are turning a little bit interesting, aren't they now, Jonny?
Yeah. Finally, after 8 rounds of games, and remember, when I first started watching this, I thought we'd be lucky to get 2 or 3, and we went for 8 weeks. But now, finally, we have the first postponement this weekend, which is Neyman Grodno's game against FC Minsk, and that's because at least one FC Minsk player has supposedly tested positive for coronavirus. And we've got another game in doubt as well. So the Isloch squad have been being tested today. And there's all sorts of rumours around, but I picked up a few days ago that Isloch striker Makas was missing for the last 2 weekends with no apparent explanation of what his injury was, and they're now talking about it being pneumonia, and I think we know what that's code for. It does kind of look as if we're going to be reaching a different stage in how the Belarus league pans out.
Yeah, I mean, this is certainly a different story with matches actually being canceled, and like you said, it's interesting that it's taken this long, and now, things really don't seem to be panning out too well with this. Now, one thing I do know is that, like here in the United States, for instance, the Ultimate Fighting Championship has come back without fans in the arena, and they're basically testing all of the fighters multiple times before they get in and things like that. It was, how widespread is testing being done on the players? Is that being reported? Is that something that's being done before each match, or only if it's suspected that somebody's sick?
I think there's a big problem that because in Belarus it's not been a top-down process. It's not like the Bundesliga or the Faroe Islands or whatever, where there's a policy from the top about what's supposed to happen. And we don't have that at all in Belarus. So it's really clubs making their own decisions about what their kind of testing regime is going to be. And to be honest, it looks very ad hoc. I mean, I don't want to criticize the Isloch manager Zhikovsky in a very kind of difficult situation, but he's been quite kind of elusive in press conferences and things about this issue. So I don't know if we're going to see more openness or whatever, but it goes back to what I said in the very first podcast. It's not an open society, and so I think that is just feeding into it, really.
Yeah, I mean, as difficult as it is to get information anywhere on, accurate numbers and things like that on the coronavirus, when you talk about, like you said, a place that's a closed country, it does get difficult. And then, it's certainly, like you said, if things aren't coming from the top down, a lot of these individual clubs may just not even have the financing to do regular testing, or do you even get that number of tests into a closed country? And
that's right.
Things.
I mean, they've been talking about it for League One and League Two, and how it's actually potentially prohibitively expensive for a League Two club to be running that testing regime. So how clubs in Belarus are expected to pay for it. Who knows? It's you don't want to see Belarus being the guinea pig, but at the same time, I mean, because we've got the Bundesliga coming back and we've got the postponement of the Dynamo Dresden game. It's one of our Dynamos this weekend because of coronavirus in that squad. And I wonder what's going to happen with time. Are we just going to kind of get used to it? And, players that test positive will just isolate and everything else will just carry on. That sounds weird to say now, but, we don't know how this is going to progress.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the thing. I know here with the National Basketball Association that the first time a player tested positive, which was Rudy Gobert of the Utah Jazz, they immediately shut the whole league down the first time a player tested positive. I mean, going forward, assuming that this isn't going to be something that they find a cure for tomorrow, I don't think that there's any way that things proceed forward if you're going to go about shutting down entire leagues anytime one competitor tests positive. It was just the same thing with the UFC, the Ultimate Fighting Championship. Out of 6 scheduled fights for the first event, a total of 12 fighters, there was one of the 12 fighters who tested positive. They only canceled that fight and went ahead with the rest of them.
Yeah, so, I mean, I've been in kind of heated debates with people about this, and I do feel like, leagues coming back now or next month, it probably is too soon. But at the same time, if there is no vaccine in prospect, then sooner or later someone's going to have to tackle these questions and think about how it's going to work. So, but yeah, in Belarus, it clearly just looks very, very ad hoc. And I think it's partly going to depend on just individual clubs and how diligent they are, really.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the Belarus situation sounds like it's not in a good spot. And I think that maybe has to do with the fact that, like you said, there was nothing coming down from the top to begin with. And let's hope that other leagues around the world can contain it better. But like we said before the show, and like we always do, we have to, of course, spend a quick bit of the show touching on these more socially relevant topics. But what we're ultimately here to talk about is the football that happened. And, there was a 5-3 match. So maybe that's a good place to start. Why don't you tell us about
that? Yeah, definitely. So the first kind of big bit of news is a change at the top. So Slutsk go second on goal difference after losing 2-1 to Energetic. And Energetic weren't great, actually. So Yakshaboev, who's joint top scorer of the league, 6 goals in 8. I think he scored 2 in that game from the spot, but he really, missed a couple of other really, really good chances. So I think actually Slutsk could have lost a lot more heavily. And at the end, Slutsk was showing plenty of spirit and Energetic were hanging on. But that means that Bate winning after that has kind of, has put Bate top of the league now. Slutsk, their moment in the sun might be over. We're going to have to see. They play Bate next week. But the Slutsk, publicity train goes on. It's amazing. Slutsk were featured in the New York Times, and the Belarusian TV started to talk about Slutsk as a potential Leicester City story. But I think probably the bubble has burst now, and I think a bit of realism is going to creep in. But they've survived. They've surprised us before, so we'll see.
Yeah, I mean, I was watching the standings, and of course, I made my 3-team parlay, and that really didn't seem to work out too well. But otherwise, I'm just looking here at the schedule coming up here, and I see that, like you said, that Slutsk and Bate are coming up. It really does just seem like Slutsk luck kind of has to be running out here a little bit.
Yeah, you would think so. You would think so. But, they continue to surprise. And there's nothing like a team that's enjoying its football. Yeah. So, but we'll see about that. I mean, I think Bate have got, tons of money behind them, and I've got a good few goals in them themselves. So yeah, we'll see how that turns out.
Last week, I remember that during the match, I was following along on as the score, and it just kept getting later and later, and it got to the 75th minute. And I had sent you a message, and I said, "Are Sluts gonna lose?" And you said, "Yeah, I don't know. Never count them out on getting a late goal." And then it never came. So do you think now it's kind of time to count them out for the count?
I mean, you never know with them. It's been an amazing story for sure. And just judging by, I don't know if you follow Motti's Mike on Twitter, who's been doing English language commentaries.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, and he's been saying that when it's a Slutsk game, it just goes nuts. The numbers of people following it. And on the YouTube feeds, you can check how many people are watching it at one time, and you're up to sort of 6,000 people around the world.
That's
watching
crazy because I actually did. I was telling you before the show, I did catch my first YouTube feeds because I had just at the times that they come on, it's really not convenient for me to watch YouTube generally, so I kind of follow along the score lines if or what's going on Twitter. But I did actually watch I think it was some of the FC Minsk match. I watched quite a bit of that one, and I think there was like 50 people streaming it then. So you're saying that Sluts gets 6,000?
Yeah, it's gone mad. But we'll have to see how that goes. With the other games, I'm just going to pick out highlights. Neman Grodno are in a real slump at the moment. They lost 4-2 at home to Brest, this kind of team that nobody wants. But at the same time, they probably had the goal of the weekend. Gegem Kadimyan is an Armenian player, and he is joint top scorer in the league now, along with Yakshaboev at Energetic. And he scored a great curling shot, so that was probably the goal of the weekend. But we're looking for somebody to fill now that third from bottom slot, aren't we? And I reckon FC Minsk. I mean, they won't play this weekend, of course, but I think they're starting to struggle. So they're my tip to kind of get involved in the relegation mire.
Yeah, I mean, it's surprising to see Dynamo Minsk down there, and they just continue to struggle. But with their +1 on goal difference, they're 3-0-5, which is a little bit unusual to see. I mean, and they've got 11 goals scored and 10 goals against, which means they're kind of looking at the table, they're not particularly good or bad in either offense or defense. They're just kind of middle of the road in everything. And those kind of teams usually tend to think mid-table. So I think that they'll probably find their way up, at least based on just kind of looking at those numbers. Like you said, Dynamo Minsk, on the other hand, they're a -4 on goal difference. They've allowed 16, which is the most allowed in the league. Whenever you start seeing a number like that, that's a team you might see sink down further than the bottom of the table. So I'm right with you on that.
Yeah. So Isloch have migrated now because of this artificial pitch issue. They've migrated to this real relic, the Tractor Stadium, which was last renovated in the 1970s. Zhukovsky, the coach, has said how much he hates the place, apparently. And Isloch kind of, more or less controlled the game against Belshina. They had a couple of disallowed goals before they finally scored 2. Jan Sane's second goal was another Jan Sane special on the volley.
I did see that. That was a nice one.
Yeah. So that was pleasing to see. Belshina got one back, but they never really looked like getting something. Game of the weekend was the Smolovice-Barte game. It's worth saying, and slightly troubling in a way, that on Sunday you had actually two of the three biggest crowds of the season. So these were crowds around the 2,500 mark. So, that might not be significant in European top division football, but that would be, a typical crowd in a lower League Two or National League game, for example. So there are some matches. I mean, I think the Smolovice one is an odd one because they are playing at Barte's old stadium in Borisov. So if you're a Barte fan, and you can easily go to a game, possibly for free, we don't know, then I can understand the temptation of that. But yeah, slightly concerning to see such big crowds. But Smolovice took the lead in that game after 49 seconds, which you kind of thought, well, that's too early, really. I mean, it's a great moment for them. But Barte started to assert themselves, but Smolovice kept getting back in it. So their third goal in a 5-3 win by Poe was, again, a really, really good goal. It's really, really worth seeing. But in the end, Barte just had too much for them, which wasn't a surprise. But I suppose what was a surprise was to see some real kind of fight spirit from Smolovice and some competence in front of goal, because that has kind of been lacking until now. So I think if I was a Smolovice fan, I think I would really take a bit of heart from that performance.
Yeah, I mean, I think that really shows a lot that they managed to get 3 into the net there, because I'm just looking at the numbers here. They only have 6 all season, so they basically doubled their goal total and did it against the team that we think is probably going to end up the best. And it's not like Bate is any slouch on defense. They've only got 9 allowed. So, I mean, that was really a third of all the goals they allowed on the season. And anytime you see 5-3, you're like, what did the hockey team show up?
But how often are we seeing this? That a game will come along, like the Torpedo game last weekend, and it will just come suddenly like
every week, like you're saying.
Yeah. It will just rip up the form book like that. The last one was Dynamo Brest getting past Dynamo Minsk 2-1. I think what I really picked up from the fact that there was a crowd there is how much the two Dynamos hate each other. There seems to be a real rivalry there. So I'd quite like to dig into that a bit more, because it was fairly hostile.
Is that a derby, or do they just hate each other because they're both Dynamos?
Well, one of the things we've been doing is trying to figure out travel distances to games, which obviously, for an English football fan with the kind of away fan culture, that kind of, we're not dealing with anything like the distances you have in the US. But we kind of were working it out, and going from Minsk to Brest, it doesn't look that far on the map, but it's equivalent to London to Liverpool, which by English standards would be a long football away trip, right? So it's not geographical proximity, I don't think. It's probably just that they are the two big fish, and they kind of share the name, so maybe there's a bit of bragging rights over who has the name, and there maybe is something like that.
Well, I would say on this side of the pond that would be a derby, but yeah, probably, yeah. Not over there in Europe. And you actually mentioned, I was actually kind of looking this up the other day to kind of get an idea of how big Belarus is compared to England. And it is a little bit smaller than England, but I did find an interesting fact that I guess Belarus is the largest landlocked nation in Europe.
Wow, yeah. And it's quite sparsely populated. I mean, if you think it's got about, for Europe,
11 million, I think.
Yeah, and it's about 2.5 times the size of, say, Hungary, which has got the same number of people. So by European standards, it's quite sparsely populated and places are quite spread out. So that was a fairly good game with a kind of good atmosphere as well. So it was entertaining. Looking forward to next week. Obviously, Minsk against Neyman is off. Neyman found an interesting solution to that today by playing a club friendly against themselves. So it was literally Neyman against Neyman reserves. It was 1-1. And then even more absurdly, they played penalties to decide who should win.
Oh,
and I'm afraid I can't tell you who won out of Neyman or Neyman. But there you go.
Certainly not Marcus. They just filed for bankruptcy. So.
Okay, yeah. Next week's fixtures. So clearly the standout fixture is going to be Bate against Slutsk. I think we're going to see Bate finally stamp their authority on the league. Apart from that, I think every game looks really open at the moment. I mean, you'd expect Smolovice and Belshina to struggle, and apart from that, it's just really difficult to call.
Yeah, I mean, I think that obviously the big story this week, unfortunately, is what we didn't want it to be, and that's what we talked about at the beginning of the show. So my question would be to you is, going forward, do you think that it's going to be a situation where we're going to see games postponed on a regular basis, where week by week we might not see every game played, and then do you think that those games are going to be rescheduled, and that perhaps down the road at the end of the season, certainly I know that you had mentioned that for instance, Isloch is a team that maybe was up there in average age a little bit, and maybe didn't quite have the depth of some teams. So if they're having to double up games late going on down the road, that's something that certainly doesn't seem to favor a team like Isloch.
Yeah, so that's true, but I suppose if I imagine that there's going to be piecemeal disruption for the rest of the season, there is quite a long time until the league finishes in December, and they don't tend to have midweek games, so the potential to double up games towards the end of the season, I think there's quite a lot of potential to do that. And that'll be good for those of us that hope we'll get out there by the end of the year, because then we might get 2 games of our favourite teams and not just one. But there's hoping. But yeah, I think piecemeal disruption and continued chaos and craziness that is the Belarus League, I think.
Yeah, and then like you said, and like we kind of started off with, is Slutsk and Bate. You have 2 teams, top of the table, 16 points, separated only by goal difference. You have Slutsk traveling to Bate, who are probably the stronger side, certainly the more established side. Things certainly look like Slutsk could be in for their second loss in a row. But hey, this is the Belarus League, and anything can happen.
Yeah, exactly. So you would think Bate with their, far superior budget. I mean, remember we were talking about Slutsk going bankrupt not so long ago. I'd expect Bate to stamp their authority, but let's see.
Well, it should be another exciting week of action. And Jonny, as always, thank you for your great knowledge, and look forward to having you on next week to talk about not only the Belarus League again, but also your favorite English club, Stevenage.
I can't wait.
Me either. Cheers. Have a great one.
Thank you. Bye.